All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Project Move. And today we're going to kind of talk about just like a general exercise prescription for kind of meeting like the minimum standards for exercise on a weekly basis.
Mm-hmm.
And we're kind of look at this differently. So kind of what we did is we kind of took compilation of different different influencers and reputable sources as far as kind of meeting certain guidelines throughout the week, and we compiled it into ChatGPT, and we asked them to kind of give us a weekly prescription as far as what you need to be doing,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to kind of talk through that, and then kind of talk through why we would change certain things, and kind of go
Right.
from there.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, right now, like I know it's like as far as especially in the U.S., we're definitely kind of in this health crisis.
Yep.
And globally as a whole, we're kind of moving that way as well.
Yeah, I think this could be one of the most important podcasts that we've done to date, just because we know that people are only getting or more unhealthy, and activity is important as far as kind of changing that landscape. So we know that people aren't meeting the physical activity guidelines, and we're just talking about the bare bones basic things. We're not even talking about specifics here. We could dive into, Peter Attia's framework. We could dive into, Andrew Huberman. Like they all have even above and beyond, but we're not even at that level yet. We're really even at the bare bones basement level of what someone should be doing on a weekly basis.
Yeah, and there's a lot of downstream effects from this, just because, I mean, as we all kind of are seeing recent events, how our healthcare is going through the roof,
Yep.
and yeah, it actually has a lot more effect on just the individual. It's affecting us kind of as a community as a whole. So
Yeah, and I think the I don't know if it's for better or for worse, but there's this adage almost like the defect is in you and not necessarily in your environment. So it's like, oh, here's a pill to, for your diabetes, or here's something for where you are in control a lot more than people realize. And so, you can make decisions on what you're eating. You can make decisions on, everyone says that they don't have time, but it's like, do you have time to be sick? So you almost have to, make time.
well, yeah, you have time for Netflix, so there's time for you to get your butt up and move.
Correct. And as we go, you're going to see this is, like I said, the basement of like bare minimum. So it's not a lot that we're asking or not a lot that we're recommending, but it's like if you're not even meeting these goals, there's a lot of room for improvement. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, let's throw out a couple kind of statistics.
Yeah.
First, Josh, what's you got the one of communicable diseases?
Yeah, so non-communicable diseases, that's basically chronic disease that we see with diabetes, heart disease, those types of things. Not like infection that we would see or some sort of outbreak. So the stat that we've got here is 80% of people over the age of 70 are living with some sort of chronic disease, and multiple typically. I think the average person's on 5 or 6 medications, and so you're living the majority of your life with some sort of ailment that we're basically just medicating or managing the symptoms. So it's a pretty shocking stat.
And this was from the
World
WHO.
World Health Organization. So I mean, it's a relatively reputable, or we would hope to be reputable as far as stats go. Um, you can kind of take that or leave it, but as far as like the global burden of disease, they do have a decent about amount of information. So
Yeah, fortunately from the I guess the U.S. standpoint, I think only 1 in 4 of U.S. are kind of meeting the daily or weekly activity kind of guidelines. It's actually higher than globally.
yeah, globally it's almost 17%. So again, there's a lot of room for improvement. So if 25% of Americans are meeting these guidelines, 75% clearly aren't. And so that just means that there's a lot of room for improvement as far as like how do we get healthier? Just start moving a little bit more, right? I
Yeah.
mean, from a very basic level.
And as we'll talk into more detail, but something is better than nothing. So the first step is kind of, yeah, kind of getting the ball rolling.
Yeah, and so again, if we are looking at these global statistics, there's no country that is at the level of the bare minimum. So all of like the United Nations um, countries, they're all failing to meet this recommendation. So it just goes to show that this is a worldwide crisis. It's not just the United States where we have maybe more technology or more advancements, which is an interesting kind of thing to think about. So we think of technology, it's supposed to like automate or help us, but it's like we still wind up being just as busy and like it doesn't necessarily free up time so that, oh, I'm only working 6 hours a day and I can have 2 hours to go out and be outside and be with my family. It's like you're still working 8 hours. um,
Yeah.
so it's kind of a fallacy of like, okay, even though we've improved technology or we haven't necessarily bought back time so that we can be healthier.
Yeah. Okay, so let's kind of maybe talk about some metrics. How do we kind of decide, uh, or what are some good correlations to figuring out how we can improve lifespan, quality of life? I think the number one is going to be your VO2 max.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like cardiovascular, like a global like metric to be kind of looking at, VO2 is a good one because you can't really separate out cardio from like you're not doing a cardio activity or a strength activity if you don't have the cardio. You're not going to be
Yes.
able to. So it's like that's always being included in what we're doing. So there are all these charts and we can see like if you want to do this specific activity, it requires this amount of VO2. So I think Peter T has this good kind of framework of like, what do you want to be able to do whenever you're 80? So if we just said, I want to be able to lift my luggage and put it into an overhead bin, even though that's a relative strength activity, there's also like a VO2 requirement that would allow us to be able to do that. And so if you don't have the metric now, you're never going to have it at 80. So it's like we need to be meeting these standards so that over time we know there's going to be a degradation of the quality. So we want to maintain as much as we can for as long as we can.
Yeah, and not to say you can't start that later in life. So if you're already, 70 plus, you can definitely still improve upon that.
Yeah, and we'll get to this, but it really only takes a few months to like start making these changes and we can see significant improvement. So it's not like you're destined to be where you're at. It's just the matter that you have to take charge and start putting in some action.
Yeah, the biggest health gains come from moving from sedentary to a semi-active lifestyle. It's kind of like where you're gonna get your biggest results as far as increasing lifespan.
Yeah, so if you look at the statistics of going from 2,000 steps a day to like 5 or 7,000 steps, like that's a significant improvement in health metrics rather than going from 7,000 to like 15,000. Like the gap is so much bigger going from basically nothing to moderate versus going from moderate to, more on the higher end of things.
Yeah. What about it? What some other metrics can I throw out? I know grip strength's one of them. Peter kind of talks about that as far
Yeah,
as
and you think of grip strength, it's like the goal isn't to go just get a captains of crush and start training the grip. Grip strength correlates because, if we look at this from a long term, what were people doing whenever they were more active? Like if we look at farmers, they're constantly using their hands, they're constantly carrying things, and so having grip strength was an indicator that they were just using their bodies more. Whereas now, if we're behind a desk, and we're typing all day, that's really not necessarily challenging grip. So if we see grip strength decline, it's really an indicator that we're doing less and less, not necessarily that we haven't trained our grip.
Yeah, I think he also kind of talks about like grip strength is important just because, as we're aging, trying to prevent falls is going to be really important. Just
to be able
because,
to like catch yourself, right?
yeah. So basically, kind of decelerate yourself upon hitting the ground, because if you break a hip and you're over the age of 60, the likelihood of death, I think, what's that? The likelihood of death after, like, within that year, like, is up by like 60%.
Well, if you're above the age of 60, I think you have basically
1 in 3 chance.
It's like 20 to 20 something like, yeah, it's ridiculous. Like, you would think, okay, a 60-year-old relatively healthy, they break their hip and they have a 30% chance of dying.
Yeah.
Like, you wouldn't expect it, but it's a staggering stat. And then obviously the older you get, it goes way higher. So like if you're 70, 80, you break a hip, and it's almost 50, 60% chance.
Yeah, it was a crazy statistic I saw. I just couldn't believe that. But I mean, it makes sense.
And
Yeah.
you got to think, if you can't use your legs, you can't walk, you can't, like, so then now you aren't able to, like, your VO2 is now not going to be able to be challenged. So we see that pneumonia winds up being something that tends to get people a little bit. So
Yeah. Okay, so let's kind of go through some just general guidelines for exercise. So I think as far as the minimum effective, as far as exercise, we're looking somewhere like 150 minutes per week. So like 2 hours of kind of maybe like moderate exercise.
yeah, and I think that it doesn't matter what you do at this point. Pick something you like and do it. If the easiest thing to do is go for a walk. At a moderate pace. You don't want to be a snail and just kind of slowly walk. Like, you want a decent pace, but at the same time, like, if you don't like walk, like, pick something. And so it's really, at this stage, it's just about, like you said, do something rather than do nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, you can also then correlate that to like maybe like 75 minutes, a little over an hour a week of more vigorous activity. So I know people are like, well, I don't have 2 hours a week to exercise, but like you can still find time to kind of meet these minimal requirements. Yeah.
And again, if we're talking like just getting started, do it as like what we would call like an exercise snack. Do a 5 to 10 minute walk, at lunchtime. Do a 5 minute walk in the morning. Like, there are ways where you don't have to get 150 minutes of cardio in one setting. Yes, we talked about in a previous podcast about how steady state aerobic activity is important and you need over 45 minutes, but that's a different parameter that we were trying to optimize for. Right now, we're just trying to get people to start doing something. And so if it means doing short 5 minute walks and over the course of the week they add up to your 150 minutes, great. It's not necessarily about those specific metrics of trying to improve VO2 per se, or trying to improve endurance. This is just more about setting the baseline to get started.
Yeah, but I would definitely say improving cardiovascular is going to be probably one of the most important, if not the most important, just because of all the other downstream effects of that. Like, being metabolically fit ties into, or let's take it back. Being metabolically unfit ties to so many like chronic diseases.
Oh yeah, no, there's no debate there. Like, that is, and so that would be the goal, is to start working your way to improve. But it's like, if you think doing 45 minutes of steady state cardio seems daunting, we've got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And but absolutely, if we're trying to improve our blood panels, if we're trying to improve all of these metrics that we would see in a chronic disease profile, 100%, the metabolic efficiency or metabolic kind of flexibility would be where we would want to kind of spend a lot of our time, because that's just where the deficiency winds up being.
Yeah, because I mean, just going from a sedentary lifestyle for like every hour of exercise you add per week, you're going to see substantial improvement in like your different biometrics.
Yeah, and I think there's a point of diminishing returns at 10 hours, but 10 hours is a lot. But it's
Yeah.
like, that's where the healthiest people are living, at that level. So it's like, you've got to start putting in the work. And, I think 3 hours is kind of really like if we're trying to baseline optimize, 3 hours a week would be kind of where we're at, and that's still above our 150 minutes. But at the same time, like I said, getting started is really kind of the name of the game here.
Yeah. Also, going to be important resistance training. As we kind of mentioned earlier, kind of that grip strength factor as far as being a good determinant as far as how long you're going to live. And I think it just kind of goes with being more physically active and lifting things and just so by combining some sort of resistance training, and we're going to go into the details here in a second. That is also going to be very important just because as we get older, we know we see a decrease in muscle mass,
Correct.
which then also then kind of decreases metabolic health. So keeping lean body mass is very important just for, I mean, metabolic health, but then also your ability to move and to, for I guess prevent yourself from getting like being in like in a like assisted living facility.
Yeah, because you know if you can't get up and down from a toilet, that's a reason to go into either a nursing home or an assisted living facility. So the key is avoiding frailty, avoiding sarcopenia, which is basically muscle loss. And so we know that as we age, we lose like 1.4% of muscle mass per year. And so it's one of those things that it just starts to go downhill pretty quick after the age of 40.
Yeah. Okay, so types of resistance training. I would say first, probably most important, we're probably looking at, and we've talked about in previous episodes, is kind of this more talking about like establishing better connective tissue. And really kind of focusing maybe more with resistance training on isometrics, but then also eccentrics, which we're basically trying to work on force absorption, trying to
Right.
be able to absorb loads and be able to kind of do so without injury. Because that's kind of what the grip strength is if we can basically slow our descent from a fall, which is like that eccentric range of motion, we're going to significantly decrease the likelihood of injury.
Absolutely.
So eccentric training. So basically you're just going with gravity. So think of like if you're doing some step downs, like this, so that'd be a great example. So like you could go to your steps. If find a pair of steps anywhere, maybe go up to the first step or second step, and then just kind of gradually work on stepping down as slow as you can. So somewhere, I would say maybe north of 10 seconds is probably like a good start. So let me holding onto the handrails and just kind of really working on slowing your descent, and just slowly, as I like to say and tell clients, like imagine like you're trying to dip you're standing on a pool deck, you're just trying to dip your toes in the water.
Yeah, and as best you can, you want to feel like the leg is controlling the movement. In the beginning, you're going to want to be gripping the wall or gripping the railing. So you're going to want to offload a little bit, but really you want to use that leg as much as you can for the control.
Yeah. So yeah, anything with that. So then also then maybe push-ups. We're looking at trying to then just kind of as we're going down towards the floor, just work on nice slow descents, trying to accumulate more time under tension, going with gravity than probably against gravity.
Yeah, and I think if we're looking at injuries, we've talked about this numerous times. Connective tissue is where the injuries typically occur. So if we can build resiliency in the connective tissue, we're going to be able to absorb a little bit more force. We're going to be able to kind of stave off those injuries.
Yes. Okay, so other types of resistance training, it's really going to, I guess, anything is better than nothing. But generally, we're kind of looking for like 2 days a week uh, for resistance training. And as I said, anything we can do more on top of that is just going to be uh,
And I would say think full body. You can look at like the bodybuilder splits or whatever, like that's kind of, it is what it is. But you know, you want to do 2 kind of full body sessions per week, hitting the major muscle groups. It doesn't need to be complicated, but I would say look at more of a well-rounded program rather than trying to, like, yes, we could dive into the specifics and you can go back to previous episodes if you want to know more about the specifics. But what we're talking about here is full body strength training sessions just to kind of spark muscle growth or muscle stimulation.
Just think, keep it basic: squats, push-ups, pull-ups, some sort of rows, hinging motions, just something where you're just body weight exercises is going to be great.
Absolutely.
Something to kind of get that ball rolling, and then as you're progressing and you start to see results taper off, then we can maybe kind of go back and look at previous episodes, and you kind of look at, now, how do I overcome those plateaus? But doing something, and you don't have to have a gym membership. Just move your body in as much range of motion as you can. If you can, try to go slow with gravity.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good place to start.
Yeah, that's gonna be, now we're gonna kind of maybe break it down maybe in like age groups as far as how has it changed, how it changes per age group, and maybe start tackling and throwing in some more things that we see important for each age group. So we're going to first kind of talk about ages kind of that 18 to 30. Cardiovascular, what are we looking at, Josh?
Yeah, I think that, this is kind of the, the 150 minutes doesn't really change across the age groups. That's kind of still where, like, the minimum. But like if we were trying to get a little bit above that, we would want kind of 2 45 minutes at, like that would be kind of what we would want to shoot for, at minimum.
So yeah, and as we're younger, we should have more capacity to do things. So 18 to 30, we're looking for more vigorous activity. That way we're also kind of keeping ourselves, because as you mentioned before, if you want to be able to do something, when you're 80, the sooner we can start, the more likely we are to be able to do that when we're older. So the more vigorous activity we can incorporate it in, in that younger age, it's going to carry over into, those golden years. So I think that, what is it, that people who've been lifelong exercisers up into their 70s are going to have a higher VO2 max than people who have been sedentary their whole life and in their 20s.
Absolutely. So, if we kind of do that back casting where we, like, okay, at age 80, we want to be able to do this particular activity. And if we say we need a VO2 of 30, that means if we kind of predict at the age of 50, we probably need a VO2 around 50, because we know as we age, decline is going to happen. And so the goal is to kind of minimize the decline over time, but we know it's going to happen no matter what. So we have to start off at a higher number so that as we decline, we kind of decline to the number that we need. But if we're sedentary, we probably only have a VO2 of like 30, 35. So if we're starting at 35 and we need a 35 or 30 at the age of 80, it's not really gonna happen. So
yeah. And okay, so the other thing as far as kind of compiling this data and kind of recommendations is strength training. Our model kind of recommended we needed like 2 to 3 times a week, kind of focusing on more compound exercise, squats, lunges, bench presses, more of these kind of compound full body movements. Definitely agree with 100%. Don't know if I really changed much more. Like, just as much variability as you can get in your exercise to keep good quality tissue across the board because it'll compound as we get older. So if we're only doing very specific things, by the time we get into our 40s now, we're going to start to see some kind of more of this connective tissue dysfunction and a lot more decrease in range of motion that's only going to compound each decade after that. So as much variability as you can, 2 to 3 times per week, is kind of the recommendation, or kind of how we would change it. I would say why we say throw as much variability in there as we can is because, yeah, if we're very limited in our scope of exercise, our body's going to adapt to that. So things I would say, or we would say, to kind of add, especially in that younger age group, is starting with some sort of body practice where you're kind of going through those ranges of motions just to kind of, for maintenance, just to kind of keep the range of motions you have. So that way it's not compounding and we're losing more and more each decade.
Yeah, so I mean, cardiovascular and strength are very broad categories. Not that we need to dive into specifics, but we need to maintain joint health. Strength training, while can be part of that, is not necessarily sufficient to maintain joint health. So we need kind of a joint practice, if you will. We need connective tissue health, which again, strength training can be a part of, but it's not necessarily going to bias towards connective tissue. Obviously, muscular is part of that. So, like, we could take each category and we could, but you go back to other episodes and, we've dived into a lot of these different details. So I think that, from a big picture point of view, yes, we want to maintain strength for as long as possible. We want to maintain cardiovascular health for as long as possible. But we also need a bunch of other things that would really make this well-rounded program. We're not talking about nutrition here. We're not talking about sleep and recovery, but all of those things matter. And so you can't, you can't have a good training plan and poor sleep, and you can't have a good training plan and a terrible diet. Like, all of these things matter. And so clearly we're talking about the movement component, but if we're talking about health in general, all of those things will come into play.
Yeah. So having some sort of, especially this 18 to 29, 18 to 30 category, having some sort of body practice. Honestly, if you're trying to keep what you got, we would both say the best way to go about doing that is going to be CARs, controlled articular rotations. If you know what that is, look it up. There's plenty of videos out there now. But the idea is that it's going to help you form that brain muscle connection and allow you to keep that range of motion that you have. So it's you're not really going to gain any more range of motion from that, but it's going to help solidify that range of motion that you have. And then by throwing as much variability in these compound exercises as we can essentially maintain strength throughout as much range of motion as we can.
Yeah, and I think we've seen the.
I mean, yoga would be another. Like, yoga is better than nothing. Doing some sort of stretching, getting some sort of stretching app is better than nothing. Something where you're getting more attuned with your body's kind of range of motion is very important to establish early, just to kind of, like I said, maintain that joint health and ranges of motion, so that way it's not compounding against you in those years to come.
Yeah, we've seen the popularity of martial arts, jiu-jitsu, those types of things, and really, besides the self-defense component, like, it really comes down to a body practice, right? Being able to control our body weight, and then learning how to control others, like, in our space, right? So I think that the popularity of those types of things really stem back to what you're talking about, improving the ability for you to control yourself. So I think that that's super important. But also, we've talked about, like, this is in the younger years. So if you don't establish it in the younger years, it's more difficult to get it whenever you're older. So it's like we definitely see the importance of starting earlier rather than trying to, like, catch up or make up for it later, because there is the old adage of, if you don't use it, you lose it. And so to get it back is always harder than to just maintain it in the first place.
Yeah. All right, let's maybe move on. Let's kind of go into
Yep.
that next age group, 30 to 49, kind of 50 years old.
Yeah. So that 18 to 29, we really like the 150 minutes. Like we really need to be exceeding that, honestly. But this kind of 30 to 49 is where that 150 minutes really kind of is the baseline. And so, it's 150 minutes of cardio, it's that 75 minutes of more vigorous, and then we're at that same kind of 2 days a week. We might have been at 3 days a week early, in the earlier years. We're now at a minimum of 2 days per week on the strength training side. So, you know, the metrics really don't change that much. Now, we might change what we're doing. Like, in the younger years, we might be doing, more hiking or cycling or, something. We might be doing less vigorous things, but really, you still get to kind of pick and choose what you want to do.
Okay, so guidelines from our AI models talking about we kind of looking for something like 150, keeping 150 minutes of moderate exercise, 75 minutes vigorous exercise, 1 to 2 high intensity workouts per week.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's probably good. That's going to help keep our VO2 max kind of where we're at, because we need this, like I said, or we mentioned before, we need a certain cardiovascular capacity in order to be able to do certain tasks. So throwing in those higher intensity workouts is going to kind of help keep that threshold, maybe slightly raise it so that we can keep doing those things we want to do later on in life.
Yeah, so if we're talking about cardio, we have that lower intensity steady state, typically what you would define as zone 2. And then you have more of the higher intensity, what we would kind of define as zone 5. And so the zone 2 is kind of that eccentric heart function that allows us to be more efficient. The VO2 higher intensity is really where we improve our capacity. So if we're trying to optimize for overall health, we need both. We can't just do one or the other. I know a lot of times people are like, oh, I'm trying to, save time, so I'm going to do, interval training. Well, it's like, that's good, but you still really need that longer duration, steady state activity as well.
So yeah, more that moderate exercise, like that zone 2 we're talking about. So you should be able to carry on a conversation while walking. You shouldn't be able to sing, but you should be able to kind of be able to like go on a walk and talk with somebody. But like I said, you're definitely taking breaks, and you shouldn't be able to like talk forever.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a full conversation, but it would be kind of short sentences. You would want the intensity high enough to where you're able to speak, but again, you're not having like a full-blown conversation.
Yeah, and then now this kind of zone 5, these more high intensity vigorous exercise, something that's taking your breath away, shooting for something like you probably couldn't maybe do more than 60 seconds without having to stop and catch your breath.
Right, or to kind of slow down and kind of recover from.
Yes.
Yep.
Strength training recommendations from AI is going to say 2 to 3 strength workouts per week, including a lot of more now core and back exercise to kind of help support posture.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that advice. I think that this population, you're probably stuck at a desk, or you're stuck in a position, and so this would be honestly even taking like micro breaks where if you're typing out an email, don't just move on to the next one. Get up from your chair, do something for 20 seconds and kind of break up the day. But yes, the postural, and we've talked about this before, those postural muscles are important to, allow us to kind of, maintain our ability to be upright. And obviously that, if we're all slumped over, we're not going to be breathing efficiently. So by being more upright, like it affects a lot of different things.
No, I think this is actually really something you said. These little micro breaks is really important, just because as we kind of get to that past that 30 age, we're kind of really kind of solidifying ourselves in our careers and working a lot more. So
yeah,
establishing those habits early and these little micro breaks, and just, you know, forming those habits of just getting up and moving more to that something that we can continue on later in life. It's important to establish early. Not saying you can't do that later, but forming good habits early, but then also to help allow for things not to compound down the road. And what I mean by that is, you know, if, like I said, if we're working a lot more, we're kind of, you know, really kind of finding our careers, we tend to be a lot more sedentary. Our body's going to then just start adapting to the positions we put it in. So breaking up those days and throwing in some movement breaks will kind of help our body prevent that adaptation and prevent these like decreases in range of motion, which is only going to then compound later in life.
Absolutely. So the goal would be to, you know, establish good habits as early as possible and then really maintain those throughout. Again, not to say that you can't pick up better habits along the way, but really it starts at that younger age, and we just want to kind of carry that on. And, you know, again, everyone says, oh, I don't have time, I'm busy, but it's like you can find those little like breaks within your workday, and it makes a world of difference. I've had multiple patients where, you know, they've complained about, you know, neck tension or upper back, and it's like, oh yeah, just standing up and, you know, stretching or, you know, doing, it's like, oh, now I'm actually more alert. Now I'm able to kind of put my mind and concentrate a little bit better. But it's like we don't even realize that our cognitive function and our thinking, that can be affected by our posture and how we hold ourselves and those types of things.
Yeah, and one thing that's not mentioned now that I think I would probably try to throw in is now it's kind of like that 18 to 29, I had mentioned before, we kind of want to start with some sort of body practice and some sort of stretching. Here in this 30 to 49, this is where I would really maybe try to maybe throw in loading at length. So like not only stretching, but then trying to contract that tissue at length to kind of, for one, kind of counteract our body from adapting to that sedentary lifestyle that we
Sure.
typically are seeing nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
And what that's going to help do is going to help restore connective tissue, and then also add more robust connective tissue that can absorb force.
Yeah, so we know that the connective tissue kind of encapsulates or kind of surrounds our muscles. And so that loading at length allows that kind of container, if you will, to be healthier. And so we don't see that in a lot of what I would consider the traditional model of exercise. It's just not really there. So that loading at length is definitely something to incorporate for sure.
So yeah, like, and to give you kind of an example would be, so we do a lot of sitting. How do we kind of maybe counteract that sitting? And so like a couch stretch where you're basically kind of stretching your quads, go into a couch stretch, and then after that, you know, good period of time stretching, hopefully 2 minutes, then think about trying to, almost like you're kicking a soccer ball, you're trying to straighten that knee and contract those quadriceps, those thigh muscles at length. And basically what that does is it tells your body, hey, we need more connective tissue, and or it's going to help kind of restore those adhesions, those kind of sticky spots.
Sure.
That we tend to probably sometimes try to think foam rolling will help with that.
Yeah, that active component. So, you know, the stretching helps to like open up the range. And so, you know, that's what everyone typically thinks about. But if we never load it at length, the brain basically says, yeah, we stretched, but it doesn't really see the importance. So by creating that contraction, and again, we've talked about this before, low level in the beginning whenever you're first getting started, but if we can start to push that contraction to higher levels, you know, upwards of 70%, that's whenever we actually can see the body solidifying those new positions or new patterns. So, you know, if we're trying to restore length to tissue, we need that contraction component as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think besides that general guidelines as far as that 150 minutes, and then also incorporating more like 1 to 2 sessions of those more vigorous activities, definitely throwing in some more like they said, this body practice, but then also kind of loading it at length, just to kind of help counteract what we are doing throughout our day-to-day life, which is probably going to be like more sitting. So
Yeah, so if we're talking bare bones minimum, I mean, I would say this kind of falls more into the micro break category where we probably should be doing something every day, just a little bit. But if you had to say, I have these dedicated hours throughout the week, you might spend, some time doing your cardio, you might spend some time doing your strength training, but on a completely different day. I mean, you could do this on your cardio day. That would be where I would want to put in this loading at length or the connective tissue component. I wouldn't put it on the same day as my strength training. So yes, this now adds another day to your routine, but if we're trying to optimize for different qualities, in the beginning, combining them is probably okay, but we really would want to try to separate these out so we're taking advantage of the strength component, the cardio component, or the connective tissue component.
yeah, and if you work in a desk, this is what I tell my clients: set a timer, a reoccurring timer for every hour, and once that timer goes up, you get up and try to put yourself in a position, the opposite position that you were kind of being in, and think about just a nice low level contraction length. So great example is if you're sitting at a desk today, your arms are in front of you, maybe going to the doorway of your office or some sort of doorway and putting your arms up on the wall, trying to open up the chest, and then kind of lightly contract that. Once you find a stretch in the chest, lightly contract that chest at length. And you're just establishing good habits, and then also basically solidifying good quality tissue throughout that range of motion.
Yeah, and that doesn't need to be aggressive,
Yeah.
especially in the beginning.
20, 30 seconds, go back. Next hour, you come back, you get back up. Maybe you pick a different tissue.
Yeah. You might be able to do a calf stretch, or you might be able to do like a couch stretch, depending on what you've got as far as availability. But yeah, pick something different every hour, and even if it's just like stretching your rib, like something, you could then pick a different body part, each hour, and at the end of the day, you've hit every body part.
Yeah, and then another thing that's going to do for you is it's going to help you actually then be more productive at work, because now you're getting these dopamine and norepinephrine spikes as well. So it'll actually help you be more productive throughout the day. Even though you're taking a 2 to 3 minute break, you're actually going to increase your productivity going back to work.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's amazing on how the physical translates into improved like mental output. It's pretty fascinating on some of that research.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next age group. Let's go 50 to 65.
Yeah.
Anything change here as far as that?
So it's interesting because, as far as like the Chat GPT model, they're now saying lower impact. And I would say with a caveat, like, I don't think just because you're getting older, you should automatically like decrease the intensity. Now, I'm not saying that if you're a newbie, go out and do something too aggressive either. But at the same time, I think that there's this adage of, as we're getting older, we need to back off. And I think that that's actually detrimental. So it's like you have to figure out where you are. So if you're starting from scratch, that's a different than someone that's been following these guidelines, throughout their life. So I don't think that whenever we get to the age of 50, we automatically should do lower impact activities.
Yeah, and I think it's just, once we get over the age of 50, we are going to see by then a drop off in performance. I think that's just
100%. Yeah. I'm not saying that that's not part of it, but at the same time, don't just arbitrarily say, I used to run 20 miles a week and now I have to run 10 miles a week or something, whatever.
Yes, and you just want to be more cognizant of your body and just know that it's going to take, recovery time is going to be a little bit longer. So yeah, I think that's where the idea is as far as this lower impact is just know that it's going to take a little bit more time for our bodies to recover, and we're just not overdoing it to where we're then causing ourselves injury. Then we're going to have these longer breaks and kind of have these like step backs.
Yeah, and that would be exactly what we're talking about. So we would want to maintain a high enough intensity, but not to the point where we're creating this cycle or this like endless loop where we go hard, we injure ourselves, and then we got to now go through this whole like recovery. It's like that's actually detrimental to progress. So the goal would be to just slowly stack and kind of keep pushing, but at the same time we don't want to overdo it either. So we have to kind of figure out what our recovery is, and then we don't want to outpace that too much, but you have the opportunity to still kind of push the boundaries if you so choose.
Yeah. Still kind of same guidelines, that 150 minutes per week is kind of what we're looking for. Now, kind of as far as strength training, still kind of like 2 times a week, but now we're going to kind of start to see a little shift in kind of maybe slightly changing that tempo. We're now kind of maybe it's more important to then focus on the eccentric. So going more like a little bit slower with gravity. So going
Yep.
with length.
Yep.
Yeah. So they say kind of according to our A models, it's saying 3 seconds in the eccentrics. I would definitely argue probably need a little bit longer than that.
Yes.
Probably looking per rep. I mean, if we could, like maybe not every single exercise, but being able to maybe go 10 seconds, I would say at least, in that lowering or that eccentric phase, putting that muscle at length under load per rep is something we definitely want to kind of sprinkle in there.
Yeah, and I think the model also kind of now says it's almost like slow twitch bias too, which if we've gone back and you look at our inputs, the slow twitch kind of support the fast twitch. We see that as we age, the fast twitch are still important. If we're talking about an 80-year-old getting up off the toilet, could be a fast twitch activity. So we need to maintain those fibers, but we also need the control of the slow twitch. So again, if you're starting from scratch, just doing something is important. But if you're doing, say, 2 days of 2 days of strength training, one might be a little bit more towards that eccentric slow twitch. One might be a little bit more towards the fast twitch side of things. Or if you want to kind of just keep it simple, you might want to do a fast twitch activity in addition to some slow twitch in your strength session.
Yeah. Also, recommendations kind of in there is 2 to 3 times a week for these more balance exercises. I think that kind of goes in with that slow twitch idea, like that slow twitch idea of when you do more balance exercises, we're really kind of working on that stability and working on more of those deeper tissues to kind of help our body improve that ability to be able to control. So yes, that way we're not losing our balance, moving through a range of motion where we don't feel comfortable in, that we're going to be much more likely to then injure the tissue. So doing these more balance and kind of these more slower twitch exercises is going to help our ability to then be able to use those bigger fast twitch muscles to exert more force when needed.
Yeah, I think we could do a whole podcast on balance and the importance of how balance plays into aging. But I think the interesting thing about balance, so there was some research done, this is several years ago. They looked at like the proprioceptors, and so that's just kind of the receptors that tell our body where we are in space. And so they were able to stimulate the proprioceptors, and they were able to get this feedback loop, and so they could see, are they active or not during an activity. And so the proprioceptors were working just fine, but the person was unable to balance. And so basically the moral of the story was, if the joint doesn't have the ability to move, the proprioceptors are at the end ranges typically. And so this is why loading at length is important, because we're establishing strong connections with these proprioceptive inputs. So long story short is, like ankle, for example, if the ankle is super stiff and it doesn't really move, now the brain doesn't know where the foot is and what the ankle is able to do. So the feedback mechanism is now impaired to the point where if you kind of step off a curb and your brain doesn't know exactly where your foot is, you might trip.
Yeah.
So the point is, if we can maintain ranges of motion, we actually can maintain the feedback loops. So we actually then can improve our balance. So this goes back to, we need to be able to go through these full ranges of motion. We need to be able to use the joint in as many different ways as possible. But just saying, oh, you're a 70-year-old, you have poor balance, you need to do balance training, doesn't really add up, because that's the same adage as if I said, we're going to do a vision test. And then I said, well, you failed the vision test because you couldn't read the 20/20 line. Now I said, go practice the vision test, come back tomorrow and let's test your vision again. So if we test your balance and you fail, or you're not able to do it for the amount of time that's recommended, and we just say, go practice your balance, that's not necessarily helping per se. So the long story short is, we really need to be taking our joints through the fullest range of motion possible to be able to maintain the health of the joint, which establishes our balance.
Yes. Yeah. Anything else we want to add as far as that 50 to 65?
I think that to just reiterate, find the activities that you enjoy, and the key is consistency. So if we're saying something and you're like, well, I don't like that, well, find something you do like. If it's rowing, if it's cycle, like, just doesn't matter. Just find something you enjoy, and then pick the time frame and just kind of
Yeah.
go.
And if you find like you struggle, I'd say if you know you're struggling with a certain range of motion and an ability to do something, this is kind of the age I would really say probably try to seek some sort of like professional help, in the sense as far as somebody who's competent in helping you try to maybe then increase that range of motion and kind of get you to where you want to be, because it's not too late. You can still do that. So one thing I would probably add in this category is then if you don't have it, you're probably maybe aware of that, then really trying to work on improving ranges of motion as well.
Yeah, no, I see this a lot. I've got a lot of clients or patients that are in that kind of middle 50s to even early 70s. And that's a lot of what we focus on, is how can we, within their capabilities, improve ranges of motion so that they can stay as active as possible, really. And, this is where, I said earlier, you don't automatically want to lose intensity, but at the same time, we do want to pick activities that are maybe a bit safer, so that we don't want to put you in a position where you're at a high risk. But at the same time, if you have the skills and you have the ranges of motion, it doesn't mean that you just need to automatically stop.
Yeah. All right, and let's kind of move to that last age group,
Yeah.
65 plus, those golden years. Yeah, cardiovascular. A little bit more, maybe more. It's as far as the AM I was talking about. You want to have more shorter bouts of exercise, like kind of 30 minutes is kind of where the max is, but kind of talking about maybe these 10 to 15 minutes as far as these little activity bursts kind of throughout the day.
Yeah, so this kind of goes into that same micro break strategy.
Maybe a little bit longer, but yeah.
Yeah, like maybe not micro breaks, but kind of breaking up. So the time frame is really still that 150 minutes, but this kind of goes back to just chunking it into smaller components. Now, if that is too much, starting, somewhere, is better than nothing. So, if you are only able to accumulate 30 to 45 minutes, great. The goal should still be to try and get towards that 150 minutes if possible.
Yeah, and also in here it kind of talks about make sure you're warming up and cooling down. Warm up, I would actually maybe throw in a little bit maybe more specifics. Kind of
Sure.
working maybe specifically your warm up is you're going through those joint ranges of motion. You're putting your joint through as much range of motion so that one, you're prepping yourself for that workout. So the more range of motion we go to, the more activation of uh, different muscle fibers we're going to be able to then activate and then use in our workout.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just being maybe a little bit more intentional in our warm-ups, going through as much range of motion, and then also kind of like help also then just keep solidifying that range of motion that we have. So we're keeping what we currently have, and we're not losing anything along the way.
Yeah, it's funny that they throw this in here because I would argue that that's important for every, but at this age, jumping into an activity cold, if you've not really done much, we're trying to minimize the risk. And so like, we've talked about, lions don't need to warm up or whatever because they just always are doing things. So if you are always active or relatively active, that I'm not saying that means that you don't need to warm up, but you might need to warm up less. But in this age group, starting lighter and then kind of ramping up intensity is trying to minimize the potential for injury.
Yeah, I think it's just as you get older, your body, I mean, you definitely slow down, but your body's just had more time to then figure out how to cheat and conserve energy.
Yes.
So yeah, you're not gonna at this point you're not gonna move as well. So making sure that everything is kind of awake and turned on, I think is a little bit more important.
Yeah, and we've talked about priming the system, right? And we know that the body kind of sees itself from the inside out. So doing some of that joint prep that we talked about earlier just allows better communication, better brain body connection, so that whenever we go into that actual activity, we're going to get a better result.
Yeah. Moving on, strength training. It kind of talks about little 2 to 3 times per week,
Mm-hmm.
2 days per week minimum, focusing on legs and core. Yeah.
Well, we know it. As we age, gravity has weighed us down, right? So we might see, especially, we see this more in women, where they kind of get that almost like that hump where gravity is kind of. So the core, I mean, we can define that in a lot of different ways, but like just trying to maintain upright posture, right? So
yes. No, I think that's probably a good idea, just because, we're at 60, 65 plus. We're not expecting ourselves to move when we were like, in our 20s. So yeah, definitely focusing on the legs, because that's our first point of contact with this earth, is, being able to walk and absorb forces and
getting in and out of a chair, up and down from the couch.
Yeah, then walking down the street, we hit the lip of a curb or the sidewalk, and we kind of stumble. We want to be able to make sure that we have good quality lower body tissue to kind of prevent us from falling, because that's kind of what's ultimately what stops us.
Yep.
That with our core, just because everything's gonna end up funneling back through our spine, because we don't have really have a rigid skeletal system there. So being able to absorb and control our body, I really do think, legs and core are probably primary focuses.
Sure. Doesn't mean that upper body is not important, but
Yeah, I think it just depends on what you're wanting to do with life. So if you want to be able to, pick up your grandkids or pick up your grandkids or travel and, move your luggage around, you're still going to need to focus on upper body strength. But from a baseline, I don't think I disagree with the AI here and saying, definitely focusing on legs and core.
Yeah, so this is something I don't know if we've truly talked about. And I would say 10 years ago, I would have argued with you. But I think especially in this age category, machines are actually valuable for strength training, because they have a fixed range of motion. They're more controlled. So if we're trying to improve strength, I think that doing it in a safe way, in a controlled manner, could be beneficial. Now, Are there benefits to doing free weights? Are there benefit? Of course. We know that the added stability and all those other things that we want to preserve as best as possible. But I think in this age category specifically, the machines actually could be a benefit so that they can still maintain reasonable amounts of strength without the risk of potential injury with some of the balance challenges or range of motion issues that they might have.
Yeah, especially if you're, like I said, we mentioned before, we're not trying to, decrease kind of what you've currently been doing. So if you're just kind of starting off, yeah, I think machines is great. If you've been using free weights and free weight training,
Yeah.
Definitely keep up with that. Don't stop.
Yeah, I wouldn't automatically switch to machines because I got, and now I'm 65. But if you're hearing this for the first time and you're like, oh yeah, I think I should start a weight training program, going to the YMCA or your local whatever and just doing a few circuits with the machines is a good place to start.
Yeah, and I would definitely, no matter where you're going, I think that would actually be a pretty safe place to like ask for like some professional help from like a personal trainer of some sort.
Oh, 100%. Because I think the value on, because like we all like to kind of self-program, but we basically pick the things that we enjoy, and so we might neglect some of those areas where we know we need the extra help. So the personal trainer allows for motivation in some of those other areas, and I think that the guiding process, not that they're gonna like they can't do the reps for you, but they will guide you through kind of some of these programming issues that you might have.
Yeah, especially when it comes to machines, like definitely not all trainers are created equal.
Oh yeah.
But if you're, if they're putting you on machines, you're kind of, you're much less likely to, that trainer, that fitness professional is much less likely, especially if they're using machines and you're starting out, later in life, you're much less likely to open yourself up to injury. So yeah, it's definitely a lot safer and a great place to start. Yeah.
No, I just think that was something that we might not, because we've talked a lot more about other things. So I think that that's something to be said. Like I said, I would have told you 10 years ago that they still needed to be doing more of a functional, and I think that this still can be functional as long as we're integrating it with other things. I think that if all we're doing is the machines and we're not really doing other things, I think that there might be still some detrimental effects. But really, it's more positive than negative. So I can't really complain or act.
Yeah.
So.
Balance.
Yeah.
AI says crucial. Aim for 3 days per week of balance training, like Tai Chi, some sort of like yoga, some more balancing kind of 1 foot. Yeah, I think that kind of just goes back to what we were kind of talking about before is.
But it's interesting about the Tai Chi because it didn't say that previously. And I feel like Tai Chi kind of connects back to that brain-body connection, that sensory integration, that proprioceptive type. So it's like, it doesn't mean just go stand on one leg, even though it does say to stand on one leg, but it's more about how do we improve our brain-body connection. I think that's what I would be like encouraging people to, improve, rather than just going out and getting on a Bosu ball and trying to do, unstable surface training.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Also, flexibility and mobility. It should be a daily thing, something you're trying to work on daily. Static stretches for 15 to 30 seconds. Yeah, that one I'm going to disagree with as far as static stretches for 15 to 30 seconds.
Well, we're not disagreeing with the fact that stretching, but we're disagreeing with the time.
Yes.
So if we're looking at like isometric contractions, like we were talking about loading at length, that 45 seconds is kind of like the benchmark. But now if we're talking about just static stretching passively, we know that 10 to 15 seconds or 10 to 30 seconds is not sufficient. The brain basically will say this was useless. So we know that 2 minutes is the minimum threshold to target connective tissue change. So if you can't sustain the stretch for that long, and in the very beginning, it's not max effort stretching. It's, can you find a place where you could hold the stretch for 2 minutes and just hang out there? And then every time you're going to gradually kind of push it a little bit. But, in the beginning, it might just be relatively low level, but you've held the stretch for the sufficient amount of time.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's probably the only thing I would, maybe disagree with there is
But daily, and the consistency, I think, is important because, we've talked about this several times, previous, you get better at what you do consistently. So if you're a power lifter, you're going to get better at squatting, you're going to get better at the bench press, you're going to get better at deadlifting, but that confines your range of motion to those activities. So the more we can explore full range of motion in a variety of different angles, the better. And so this kind of ties back into the balance. We want to maintain the health of our joints as long as possible. So the consistency, so this needs to be an everyday thing. Does it need to start whenever we're 18 or younger? Yes. But flexibility as we age becomes more of the priority rather than some of those other metrics that we talked about.
Yeah, and it's never too late to start. So even if you're 70 years old, like I said, moving from sedentary to semi-active is where you're going to see the biggest gains.
Yeah, so kind of...
So yeah, the golden rule is doing something is greatly better than doing nothing.
Yeah, so there was this study done, and I believe they were all 75 and older, like elderly women. And they basically put them on a hardcore powerlifting program. Now, hardcore relative to their...
Yes.
And they were looking at like bone density and different things. And they were able to maintain their bone density over the course of the training. And they got to the point where they were almost lifting body weight in a deadlift or in a squat. Like, so 80-year-olds can still be doing, pretty decent strength training. And these were untrained to start with.
Yeah.
So the point is, they didn't start until this program. And so they were able to make significant progress in their quality of life. And so the interesting thing too, they enjoyed it, and now they felt more capable and more confident whenever they were doing their normal daily things.
Oh yeah, and we talked about in a previous episode as far as the happy chemicals that come from exercise.
Absolutely.
So if you haven't listened to that, definitely go back and listen to that.
Right.
So yeah, golden rule: something is better than nothing. Even if you aren't able to meet the guidelines as far as that 150 minutes 2 times a week, you get starting somewhere, because it said that each hour of exercise we add per week from going from sedentary, we see huge increases as far as our health and longevity. Right. So yeah, starting small and then just kind of building upon that, even if it is 15 to 30 seconds of stretching, start there, but just know we're trying to accumulate that 2 minutes of time under tension. Even if we're only walking for 15 minutes a week to start, doing something is going to be better than nothing. And then we can just progress that. And it'll happen easier than you think, because you're going to get these positive feedback loops from these happy chemicals, as we talked about before. And you're just going to, you will be able to then build upon that. And you'll kind of want to do that. I've had so many clients who hated exercise that once we've got that ball rolling, have just been able to continue it throughout their lives. And I don't think I've really ever had a client say, after spending a certain amount of time, want to quit exercise because they just didn't like it.
Yeah, and there are always times where it's like, I don't really feel like going to the gym. But after you go to the gym, you always feel better.
True.
Yeah. And so, just to reiterate, from the very beginning, we talked about basically only 20% of the world's population are meeting these very basic guidelines. So everyone has room for improvement. There's really no, like, and even the people that are meeting these guidelines, um, they probably could be doing better in some of these areas, as maybe other areas, improving sleep or recovery. But the point is that we are really at this kind of like inflection point of no one is moving in the way that we're supposed to be moving. We're designed to move. We're not designed to be stuck behind a desk. And so I think that this just highlights the fact that it really doesn't take much to start to move the needle, really.
Yeah. Start small and then just gradually build. And yeah, I think it's one thing it said is, and I actually really like this, is you're trying to add life to your years and not add years to your life.
Yeah, because we talk about longevity, and I don't see longevity as trying to live to 100 or 150 per se. Um, Jean Calmette is like the oldest. I think she's 122 and 4 months or something like that. But anyway, like that's not the goal. The goal is to have the highest quality. The average life expectancy is 77 or 76 or whatever. So if we round up to say 80, the goal is to live the highest quality life to the age of 80 as possible, and not necessarily try to like push the boundaries as far as like extra.
Well, yeah, because I don't think, living to 80 and being able to, do whatever it is you want to do versus living to 100 and having somebody wipe your ass for the last 20 years. I would definitely argue I would much rather just live those 80 years than 100.
Absolutely. And that's the kind of the catch 22 here. So modern medicine, we're really good at acute injury, like trauma. You get in a car accident, yeah, we have the ability to stop the bleeding, fix the broken leg, whatever. But the medical system really doesn't have a great answer for chronic disease, and we know that.
I think they do know, there's just not a profit in it.
Well, we could talk about that way too much. But if we look at 85 to 90% of spending goes into basically managing chronic disease, because clearly they're not trying to fix it, because if they fixed it, then the profit margin.
Yeah.
But long story short, the spending goes to these chronic diseases. So because of that, it's like there's just this, we're not as healthy as we could be, and there's so much that could be gained, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So yeah, 150 minutes of moderate exercise, 75 minutes of vigorous exercise. If you're not able to even come close, if you're going from sedentary, start with 10 to 15 minutes and then just kind of continue that slow, gradual slope up to that. But start somewhere. Something is better than nothing.
Yeah, I think that's really the takeaway. I think that like we said, if chronic disease, if everyone has some level of it, I think the changing the environment is kind of the first step.
Yeah, I think changing our culture our society as a whole, and just trying to encourage more movement and more exercise. I think we'll have a huge ripple effects outwards as far as everything.
Yeah, and the challenge is, like as we've talked about, like it's an active process. You have to actively kind of go against the system to a certain extent, because the system says eat McDonald's, Taco Bell, and watch Netflix.
Yeah.
So like you have to actively kind of say, I'm going to choose to do it a little differently. And I think that's a bit of the difficulty. It's not as easy as it might sound. And so basically saying, I want to be healthy, like you have to take it upon yourself to be healthy. The system's not going to save you.
Yeah. All right. And with that,
think that's a good place to end.
Let's wrap it up. Yeah, if you find this information, please like and share. If you have anything else, recommendations you have experience with, please drop us a comment and join us next time.
Yep, we'll see you soon.